My name is Vanessa Powell. I'm 38 years old, founder and CEO of Nexus Technologies, a company I built with nothing but persistence, risk, and sleepless nights. No inheritance, no favors, just vision and grit. After years of grinding alone, I had finally secured a $30 million contract with one of the biggest real estate developers in the country, and as fate would have it, that developer's son was about to become part of my family. My brother Scott was getting married, and despite the tension that had quietly grown between us over the years, I accepted the invitation. I was hopeful, naively, maybe, but I thought this could be a fresh start. A moment for my family to finally see me not just as their daughter or sister, but as someone who had earned her place at the table. But nothing could have prepared me for what I walked into. A wedding where seating arrangements said more than words ever could. A night that made one thing painfully clear: to them, I still didn't matter. What would you do if your own family made you feel like a ghost in a room full of people you helped bring together? I didn't shrink. I chose to remind them exactly who I had become. Before I tell you how everything unfolded, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. If you've ever had to fight for recognition, if you've ever had to prove your worth to the people who should have seen it all along, hit that like button and subscribe. This story is for you. Let's rewind. Scott and I grew up in Westfield, Connecticut. Just 2 years apart, we were once inseparable. Summer days spent building tree forts. Winters racing sleds down Maple Hill. Our mom, Judith, packed our lunches side by side every morning, while Dad, Robert, taught us both how to fish on Lake Champlain every summer. Those early memories. They felt warm, equal, effortless. But it didn't stay that way. When we hit high school, the gap between us began to grow. Scott joined the football team, instantly becoming the center of attention. I gravitated toward coding, and the debate team, quiet, focused, and far from the spotlight. My parents never missed one of Scott's games. They sat front row, cheering like he was already destined for greatness. My science fairs, debate competitions, they either came late or not at all. Sports build character, Dad would say proudly, patting Scott's shoulder. You'll grow out of all that tech stuff, Vanessa. But I didn't. Not even close. I earned a full scholarship to MIT. Scott scraped by at Dad's old college on a partial athletic scholarship. Still, when he graduated, he was given a management role at Powell Construction, our family's company, without ever having to prove himself. I visited home less and less. The family dinners always revolved around Scott, his games, his job, his plans. My achievements were brushed over, like footnotes in someone else's story. After college, I moved to Boston and buried myself in the tech world. I worked 80-hour weeks at a startup, learning everything I could. Meanwhile, Scott got comfortable riding the wave of the family business. With every safety net in place, at 28, I decided to take a leap they never saw coming. I pulled everything. I had my savings, a small business loan, and launched Nexus Technologies out of my tiny apartment. I slept on a fold-out couch. My kitchen table became a desk. Instant noodles were all I could afford. I was alone, exhausted, but determined. During that time, my calls home were short and awkward. There's always a spot for you at Powell Construction, Mom would say gently, if this little venture doesn't work out. Not once did they ask about my business plan. Not once did they offer support. To them, I was still the girl with the hobby. But I kept going. After 2 brutal years, everything changed. Nexus developed a groundbreaking supply chain software. Corporations took notice. My inbox overflowed with offers from the same people who once ignored me. I moved into a real office. I hired my first team. I proved without a shadow of doubt that I was more than just their tech-obsessed daughter. And right around that time, Scott met Tiffany Bradford. Tiffany wasn't just a pretty face. She was the only daughter of Richard Bradford, the billionaire owner of Bradford Enterprises, one of the most powerful commercial real estate firms in the country, the same firm I had just closed a massive deal with. Suddenly, my business and my family were about to collide. But what I didn't expect was that the wedding, what should have been a proud, shared moment, would become a battlefield. Not over love, not over marriage, but over legacy, loyalty, and visibility, because no matter how far I'd come, no matter what I had built, my seat at that wedding reminded me of something I had fought so hard to forget. In their eyes, I was still the outsider. But that night, something in me snapped, and for the first time in years, I stopped waiting to be seen. I made sure they couldn't ignore me again. Scott's relationship with Tiffany Bradford unfolded like a fairy tale drenched in wealth. There were luxury vacations in Tuscany, ski trips in Aspen, private jets, and high society galas. Photos of them were splashed across social media. Always dressed to perfection, always glowing in a world that looked like it had been cut from a billionaire's dream. My parents were completely swept up in it. The Bradfords weren't just Tiffany's family. To them, they were a stepping stone to a better life. A golden bridge into circles they never imagined entering. Mom couldn't stop gushing. Tiffany's family is so refined, she told me over the phone one evening. Richard sees Scott as more than a son-in-law. He talks to him like an equal. Equal, I almost laughed. Richard Bradford, the CEO of one of the most powerful real estate development companies in the country, was probably used to conversations with senators and billionaires. And yet, somehow, Scott, who once got suspended for cheating on a high school math test, was now suddenly worthy of admiration. I wanted to be happy for him. I did. But the more I listened, the more I felt like an outsider in my own family. Any mention of my growing company was brushed aside. I had just signed a regional logistics chain the week before, a deal I'd worked on for months. But when I told Mom, she barely reacted. "Oh, that's nice," she said. Before launching into details about Tiffany's latest gala dress and how Scott had been invited to the Bradford family retreat in the Hamptons, it wasn't jealousy, it was exhaustion. No matter how hard I worked, or what I accomplished, it was never the kind of success my parents recognized. Scott was the son living the dream. I was the daughter with quirky ambitions. So when the engagement announcement came, I wasn't surprised. What did surprise me was how quickly the family dynamic changed. Overnight, everything revolved around the Bradfords. My parents started talking about wine pairings and antique flatware like they'd been born into money. They began dropping phrases like legacy and long-term positioning as if our humble roots had never existed. I'd gone from being the overachiever to being nearly invisible. Then fate did something interesting. Around the same time, Bradford Enterprises was searching for a new tech provider to overhaul their outdated logistics systems. They wanted innovation, scalable, reliable, future-proof software. Eleanor Wright, their senior VP of operations, saw me speak at a logistics conference in Chicago. She asked for a product demo, and within a week, her team was scheduling meetings with mine. The deal was technical, clinical, professional. They didn't know who I was. They didn't know I was Scott's sister. They didn't care about my last name. All that mattered was performance. And Nexus delivered. For 3 intense months, I negotiated every detail, revised every clause, ensured every demo exceeded expectations. And when the final contract came through, $30 million in revenue, it was a moment I'll never forget. I wasn't just building something. I had built something. I called my parents the next day to share the news. "Oh wow, that's great," Mom said, sounding distracted. "By the way, did you see the invite for Scott and Tiffany's engagement party? It's going to be at the Bradford Estates. They're flying in a jazz band from New Orleans. Can you believe it?" She didn't ask what the contract meant. Didn't ask how I felt. Just moved on. I swallowed my frustration and told her I'd see them at the party. When the day came, I pulled up to the Bradford estate and had to take a breath. The property was stunning: grand archways, fountains carved from Italian marble, manicured hedges that looked hand-stitched by artists. This wasn't just wealth. It was power dressed in architecture. On side, the guests glittered like a constellation of the East Coast elite. I walked among them unnoticed, until a deep voice called out behind me, "You must be Vanessa Powell." I turned and met the sharp blue eyes of Richard Bradford himself. He extended his hand, cool and firm. "Your company is doing excellent work," he said. "Eleanor's been praising your logistics platform for weeks." I was caught off guard. "Thank you," I said, composing myself. "We're proud of the results so far." He nodded slowly. "You're the brains behind Nexus." "That's impressive." Before I could say more, my mother appeared beside us, beaming nervously. "Oh, you've met Vanessa. She's Scott's sister." Very tech-savvy. Richard's smile dimmed just slightly. "Scott's sister," he echoed. My stomach turned. He hadn't known? Which meant Scott hadn't told him. "That's right," I confirmed, forcing a smile. "Nice to finally connect the dots." Richard gave me another curious look. "Interesting," he said. "Scott never mentioned you." He didn't have to say more. The implication was clear. My own brother had erased me from the narrative. My mom let out a strained laugh. "Vanessa's always been the quiet one. A bit of a lone wolf. All those gadgets and computers, but she means well. I could feel the sting behind those words. Meant well, like I was some awkward side character in a story about Scott's glory. But Richard wasn't laughing. He gave me a long, thoughtful look before shaking my hand again. "We'll talk more soon," he said. "I want to hear about your vision for long-term integration." And then he disappeared into the crowd. That moment didn't leave me angry, it left me sharp. I saw, with perfect clarity, just how deep the narrative ran. Scott wasn't just the golden child. He had written the story so tightly that I wasn't even a footnote, and now, confronted with my reality, the woman who had earned his future father-in-law's respect without name-dropping, begging, or pretending he had no script to fall back on. I stayed at the party for another hour, then left quietly. Photos. No fanfare. The next week, the official wedding invitation arrived. Gold foil lettering, heavy cream cardstock, calligraphy so elegant it looked like art. Everything was perfect. Until I saw the seating arrangement. That was when it all snapped into place. Because what they didn't know, what none of them had counted on, was that I wasn't there to play a role in their show. I was there to be seen, and I was done waiting for permission. "Are you sure you want to walk into this?" Marcus asked softly, leaning against the doorframe of my bedroom. "You've told me so much about your family, none of it sounds easy." I paused, fingers tightening around my bracelet clasp. "Exactly why I want you there. I need someone who actually sees me. Someone who knows I'm more than what they remember." The night before the wedding, a strange impulse nudged me to call Scott. Maybe it was hope. Maybe a desperate attempt to bridge the gap before everything became too performative. "Hey," I said when he picked up. "Just wanted to say, I'm really happy for you, and I'm looking forward to tomorrow." "Thanks, sis," he replied, but his voice sounded distracted. "It's chaos here. Tiffany's got the planner on speed dial, and Dad's throwing names at the guest list like darts. It's non-stop. Need any help?" I offered. "Nah, we've got it under control." He hesitated. "Look, about the seating arrangements, we had to move some stuff around, with all the new additions. It's all taken care of though. No worries." There was a flicker of hesitation in his tone that left me uneasy. "Okay," I said slowly. "See you tomorrow." As I hung up, I tried not to overanalyze. I told myself to relax, that this was about Scott's happiness, not mine, but something in my gut refused to settle. The next morning, Marcus and I drove up the long, winding driveway of the Bradford estate. As the gates opened, the world beyond felt like a different universe, the kind with its own set of rules. 30 acres of elegance stretched before oozling lawns, sculpted hedges, marble fountains, and a sweeping Georgian mansion that looked like it belonged on the cover of an architecture magazine. Marcus stared out the window. "You didn't mention your brother was marrying into royalty." "I didn't know it would be this, grand," I murmured. "It's my first time here too." A valet in a tailored suit opened my door with mechanical grace. "Welcome to the Bradford Powell wedding, ma'am," he said, as if rehearsed. We stepped onto a crushed stone path lined with white roses, their fragrance drifting through the salty breeze off Long Island Sound. A string quartet played under a white canopy while guests in designer outfits drifted like they belonged in a magazine spread. Champagne flutes clinked softly. Laughter curled through the air like perfume. "Vanessa," my mother called, her voice slicing through the atmosphere like the chime of fine china. She walked briskly toward us, wearing a pale pink dress she had gushed over multiple times during her weekly check-ins. Her hair was styled in soft curls, makeup pristine, everything perfectly curated for the day. "You're here," she said, taking me in with a glance before locking onto Marcus. "And who is this, Mom?" "This is Marcus." "Marcus, meet my mother, Judith Powell." He extended his hand graciously. "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Powell. Everything looks beautiful." "Thank you," she replied, her gaze flicking over his suit and posture. Then she turned back to me. "Your father's by the bar with Richard and the other investors. Come say hello." She pivoted, assuming we'd follow. "She's got presents," Marcus whispered with a grin. "She's got something," I replied under my breath. We weaved through clusters of guests until we reached the open bar set near a manicured hedge. My father stood at the center of a tight circle of older men in dark suits, glass in hand, laughing along with something Richard Bradford had just said. When he saw me, his smile froze, then quickly reassembled itself. "There's my girl," he said, pulling me in for a brief one-armed hug. "And this must be your friend." "Marcus," I said. "He's with me." My father barely nodded before turning back to the group. Richard Bradford, in contrast, greeted me like an old friend. Vanessa, finally, he said warmly. I was just telling the fellas how your Nexus software has completely transformed our back-end systems. 3 months and we're already seeing a 40% improvement in logistics efficiency. All eyes turned to me. You developed that? One man asked, surprised. I've been hearing about that system non-stop. You're the brains behind it. Before I could answer, my father stepped in. Well, Vanessa always had a knack for computers, he said, voice casual. But don't forget Scott's the one who introduced her to Richard. He's always looking out for his little sister. My stomach dropped. It was a lie. And he knew it. Everyone who mattered knew it. Richard's brows lifted slightly. He didn't correct my father, but the pause spoke volumes. I took a breath, ready to speak. Actually, but I didn't get the chance. Tiffany Bradford arrived like a breeze, trailing diamonds. She was breathtaking, her white gown tailored to perfection. Her blonde hair arranged in an elaborate bun laced with glittering pins. Everything about her screamed elegance. Vanessa, she said with a practiced smile. So glad you're here. And Marcus, lovely to meet you. Pleasure's mine, Marcus replied. Tiffany turned back to her father. Daddy, the photographer, needs you near the fountain. He gave me a courteous nod before allowing her to guide him away. Marcus waited until they were out of earshot. She floats like she owns the air, he said. I gave a small, humorless smile. She kind of does, at least around here. My father had already returned to laughing with his circle. My presence forgotten as quickly as it was acknowledged. Marcus reached for my hand, squeezing gently. You okay? I nodded, but the truth was I wasn't. Not even close. This wasn't new. This had always been the pattern. Their version of my story always swallowed the truth. Every time I made progress, they found a way to pin it to Scott, to paint me as the side note. But this time, something was different. I didn't fight my way here to shrink back into silence. I didn't pour years of blood and grit into Nexus, just to be someone's convenient anecdote. They could pretend I didn't matter. But the difference now, the world knew who I was Avon, if they refused to see it, and today, I wasn't going to be invisible, anymore. Vanessa, you made it. Tiffany's voice rang out like a bell chiming over polished marble as she approached with a sweeping air kiss to each cheek. And navy blue so practical, she added, her eyes skimming over my dress with a flicker of polite disapproval, masked behind a manufactured smile. She didn't miss a beat before sliding in her real message. I could have sworn I mentioned that family was wearing pastels for the photos. You didn't, I said evenly, unwilling to bite. But thank you. Congratulations. Everything looks stunning, doesn't it though? She beamed, grabbing hold of Richard's arm like she was staking a claim on royalty. Daddy spared no expense, of course. Scott's getting ready with his groomsmen. Ceremony kicks off in about 30. Hope you're ready. Then her gaze landed on Marcus like she was seeing him for the first time. Her expression transformed instantly from polite interest to something else entirely. Her lashes fluttered. And, this must be ... Marcus Chin, I replied calmly, though I could feel the tension prickling my neck. Horizon Ventures, she said, the name clicking into place like a slot machine hitting the jackpot. Oh, Daddy's mentioned your firm before. Big players. You absolutely must sit at the family table with us during the reception. Before I could speak, Marcus placed a steadying hand at the small of my back. Thank you, he said warmly, but I'll be seated with Vanessa. Of course. Tiffany's lips stretched into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Naturally. I should go check in with the planner about final seating. You know how weddings are, so many changes, so little time. And with that, she glided off, her silk gown whispering behind her like a second voice. Marcus leaned toward me, his voice low and wry. Is it just me, or did it suddenly get colder out here? She's always had a chill about her, I murmured. The ceremony itself was as ornate and sterile as a glossy magazine spread. Everything was flawless to the point of feeling lifeless. A well-known string quartet played a rendition of something classical, yet forgettable. The officiant, a celebrity minister with a reality show smile, led them through custom vows that sounded like they were ghostwritten by a PR team. Scott looked handsome in his tux, but his nerves were showing. He barely glanced at Tiffany as they exchanged promises they probably rehearsed more than they felt. I couldn't help noticing how stiff his hands were as he placed the ring on her finger, how detached his eyes seemed as he smiled for the cameras. Once the formalities concluded, Guests were directed toward the reception, a sprawling white tent on the estate lawn. Icily mistaken for a gala event rather than a wedding celebration. Crystal chandeliers hung from the fabric ceiling like something out of Versailles. Tables dressed in pristine linen stood in perfect symmetry, each centerpiece a towering arrangement of roses, orchids, and calla lilies. It was beautiful. Overwhelmingly so, but it lacked soul. "Let's find our table," I said to Marcus, scanning the area for a seating chart. "I need a drink." Near the entrance stood a tall, tense-looking woman in black with a tablet clutched to her chest. She was clearly the gatekeeper of the evening. "Vanessa Powell. +1, I told her. Her fingers tapped quickly across the screen. Her brow furrowed, then she tapped again. "Powell. .. She glanced up at me, then back down. "Just a moment." She scrolled once more, then froze. "Here you are. Vanessa Powell, guest table O." Her tone was forced, her smile brittle. "Is there a problem?" Marcus asked, brows drawing together. "Not at all. Just ... Give me a moment." She turned on her heel and disappeared into the crowd like smoke. We waited, and waited. Each passing minute thickened the awkwardness, like syrup drizzling over the back of my neck. Marcus glanced at me. "Feels like we're being stalled." "Feels like something's off," I said, watching the swaying shadows of servers darting in and out of the tent. 5 minutes later, she returned with an older woman in a navy blazer, who introduced herself in a hushed voice as the catering manager. "Miss Powell," she began, voice low, "there's been a small mix-up with the seating. The primary reception tables are currently at full capacity. IRSVPD 2 months ago," I said, my voice sharp but controlled. "And I'm the groom's sister." She nodded, eyes flicking down in what might have been embarrassment or avoidance. "Yes, absolutely. We understand." Unfortunately, with the last-minute guest additions and adjustments, things shifted. "We've prepared alternative seating accommodations for you and your guest." Marcus gave a small laugh. "Alternative seating. If you'll come with me," the manager said, already turning. I glanced at Marcus. His jaw was tight. Mine was tighter. She led us away from the grand reception tent, not toward the rows of tables glowing under chandeliers, but behind the main event space, through a narrow passage lined with staff-only signs. The laughter and music grew quieter with each step. The floral scent was replaced by something more metallic, like dishwater and stainless steel. We entered the kitchen. Stainless counters, pots clanging, staff rushing about, avoiding eye contact. In the far corner sat a small folding table, hastily covered with a wrinkled white cloth. 2 chairs, no candles, no flowers, just a sad little setting by a stack of clean dishes. "You cannot be serious," I said, turning toward the manager. "I truly apologize," she murmured, unable to meet my eyes. "There were changes, yes," I interrupted, "to accommodate what more important people?" "The bride was very specific," she said cautiously. "Some business associates needed closer proximity." "I am a business associate," I said, my voice rising with each syllable. "Bradford Enterprises just signed a $30 million deal with my company." She looked genuinely confused, even startled. I wasn't informed. "I'm just relaying instructions from the planner." Before I could say more, a familiar, cloying voice floated into the room. "Vanessa, there you are." Tiffany stood in the doorway, sipping champagne like she was at a Fashion Week afterparty. Her eyes flicked over the scene. And if she was surprised to see us near the industrial dishwasher, she didn't show it. "I hope they found you your spot. It's been an absolute zoo with all the last-minute changes." I stared at her, words tumbling behind my lips but refusing to take shape. "You really seated us in the kitchen." She waved a manicured hand. "It's just temporary. You know how these events go. Daddy had to squeeze in some big investors, but you're still part of the celebration. By hiding us behind the staff." Tiffany sipped her drink. "I wouldn't say hiding. Besides, it's not like anyone's going to notice. You'll still get your filet mignon and sea bass." Marcus stepped forward. "You do realize this is unbelievably disrespectful, right?" Her eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "Well, it's not about seating charts, Marcus. It's about love and celebration. I hope you both understand." She didn't wait for a reply. She just turned, voice floating back as she disappeared. "We'll toast to you during the speeches." For a moment, I stood frozen. All the grace I'd walked in with, all the dignity I'd carried, it buckled under the weight of humiliation. My face burned. My stomach twisted. Marcus pulled out one of the chairs and looked at it like it was covered in thorns. "This is absurd," he said. "You don't deserve this." No, I didn't. And I wasn't going to take it. I turned on my heel, heels clicking sharply on the tiled floor. "We're not staying here." He followed, jaw set. Good, because I was about to flip that damn table. We returned to the tent not to sit, but to observe. From a distance, the tables glittered with laughter, champagne, and high society. My parents were already seated near the front. Scott was laughing, probably unaware. Or maybe not. It didn't matter. What mattered was what I'd decided. They had tried to make me invisible, but they were about to see me in full color. And then some. Tiffany stood in the doorway like she belonged on the cover of a magazine, flute in one hand, her diamond-studded smile sparkling beneath the chandeliers. "No, Vanessa, there you are," she said sweetly, her eyes flicking from me to the small table by the kitchen wall. "I was wondering if they'd shown you to your seats yet." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "This?" I asked, gesturing toward the tiny table tucked beside a stack of crates. She tilted her head, feigning surprise. "It's intimate. Isn't it private? I thought you'd prefer something quieter, away from the bustle." My jaw clenched. "You seated me in the kitchen." "Well," she said, voice still dripping with manufactured grace. "The main area filled up so quickly. We had to make space for a few of Daddy's partners. It's nothing personal, I promise." I wanted to scream. Nothing personal. I was the groom's sister, and she absolutely knew that my company had just signed the largest deal of Bradford Enterprises' fiscal year. This wasn't an oversight. It was a calculated insult. Before I could respond, Marcus spoke, his voice cool but edged with steel. "We'll be leaving." Tiffany blinked, caught off guard. "Leaving? But dinner hasn't even been served." "That's all right," he replied, guiding me gently by the elbow. We lost our appetite somewhere between the valet and the pantry. Tiffany's mouth twitched, struggling between a smirk and a frown. "Suit yourself." We walked out without another word, past the waitstaff, through the hallway, and out into the garden. My heels clicked against the stone path like a metronome for my growing fury. "I'm sorry," I said to Marcus, my throat tight. "You didn't sign up for this humiliation." He stopped walking and turned to me. "Vanessa, I signed up to be here with you, wherever that meant sitting. But that doesn't mean I'm okay watching someone disrespect you. Especially not like that." His words made my chest ache, not just from the kindness, but from how rare it felt to be defended, to be seen. "I should have known," I whispered. "Every time I think things have changed, they remind me where I stand." "You're not the one who should feel ashamed," he said. But shame had already wrapped itself around my ribs like iron bands. I thought back to every moment I'd spent, trying to earn their approval. Every late night, every win, every sacrifice. And still, I wasn't welcome at my own brother's table. We made it to the car, but I paused before getting in. The air was warm and fragrant with the garden's blooms. A cruel contrast to the coldness I felt inside. "I can't just leave," I said, half to myself. "You want to go back in?" Marcus asked carefully. "No," I said, shaking my head. "But I need to speak to Scott. I need him to understand exactly what just happened." Marcus nodded. "I'll wait here." I turned back toward the mansion, weaving my way through the maze of hedges and lanterns until I reached the edge of the tent. The music had started up again, a cheerful jazz ensemble that clashed violently with the knot in my stomach. Inside, I spotted Scott laughing at a table near the front. Tiffany was seated beside him, her hand resting delicately on his arm. My parents sat across from them, sipping champagne, looking like royalty. I hovered by the edge of the tent, unnoticed. A waiter passed with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. I took none. After a moment, I stepped inside. My heels loud against the marble floor as I approached the head table. "Scott," I called, keeping my voice steady. He turned, and his smile faltered when he saw me. "Can we talk?" I asked. He looked around awkwardly, then rose. "Sure. What's up?" We walked a few feet away, near the bar, where the din of the reception muffled our conversation. "They sat me in the kitchen," I said, without preamble. He frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean the seating chart. I was placed in a side room, near the service staff. Not even in the tent. And don't tell me it was a mistake." Tiffany knew exactly what she was doing. He sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "Vanessa, it's been chaos all week. There've been so many changes." She didn't mean anything by it. She absolutely did. And you know it. He looked away, his jaw tense. It's her day. I'm trying to keep the peace. And, what about me? I asked, louder than I meant to. What about your sister who's done nothing but support you, even when you've never lifted a finger to support me? He flinched. That's not fair. No. Because it feels fair. It feels like the most honest thing I've said all day. Guests were beginning to glance over. I didn't care. You watched me get sidelined, I continued, and you said nothing. You let Tiffany treat me like I didn't matter. She didn't mean it like that, he repeated. She meant every bit of it, the dress comment, the seating. She's threatened by me, Scott, and instead of standing up for me, you folded. I didn't ask her to do any of that, he said weakly. No, I said, backing away. You didn't have to. I walked out before I said something I couldn't take back. My hands were shaking, not from sadness, but from clarity, a clarity I hadn't had in years. Outside, Marcus stood leaning against the car, arms crossed. Everything okay? He asked gently. No, I said, getting in. But it will be. We drove in silence for a while, the city lights flickering, past. My phone buzzed several times. My mother, then Scott. I ignored them all. When we pulled into the driveway of my brownstone, Marcus killed the engine but didn't move. You don't owe them anything, he said finally. I know, I whispered. But that wasn't entirely true. I owed them something, just not what they expected. Inside my home, I kicked off my heels and sat on the couch, letting the exhaustion wash over me. Marcus brought me a glass of wine, then sat beside me, wordless. They're never going to change, I said finally. Are they? He took a sip. I don't think they see the need. I nodded, the weight of decades pressing on my shoulders, but somewhere beneath that weight, something else stirred, something sharper, more resolute. They think they can erase me, I murmured. Marcus looked over. They're wrong. I met his gaze. I'm going to remind them exactly who I am. And just like that, a plan began to form. We came to a halt near the head table where Richard Bradford sat flanked by several sharply dressed men, his trusted allies. Corporate heavyweights cloaked in tailored suits and expensive smiles. Laughter flowed freely among them, punctuated by the clink of crystal glasses raised high in yet another toast to success. Their world was perfectly ordered, just the way Richard liked it structured. Hierarchical, and favoring only those who played by his rules. I stared at the table, jaw tight. That's where I belong, I murmured, my voice low and unwavering. Not because I'm Scott's sister. Because I'm the CEO of the company your future depends on. Marcus didn't hesitate. Then let's make sure they know exactly who they tried to sideline. His words bolstered me. I stood taller, shoulders back, spine straightened by resolve rather than pride. I wasn't walking back into that reception to be tolerated. I was walking in to be acknowledged. We stepped into the tent again, the golden light spilling across. The guests, illuminating conversations, polite laughter, the soft hum of jazz. Waiters moved like shadows, offering trays of hors d'oeuvres and champagne. Nothing had changed on the surface, but everything felt different now. No one noticed our return at first, which was almost poetic fitting. Even, they had tried to make me invisible. But you can't ignore someone who refuses to disappear. As I scanned the sea of faces, my eyes locked onto my destination. The head table, adorned with white orchids, gold-rimmed glassware, and silver cutlery. Richard was mid-sentence, animatedly discussing something with a man I immediately recognized, Thomas Harrington from Coastal Development. The others were likely key stakeholders, their presence at a wedding merely a convenient excuse for closing deals under the guise of celebration. They're talking mergers, Marcus said, keeping his voice low, his eyes following mine. That's Thomas. And over there, that's Louis Marks. If they're both here, this isn't just networking. Bradford's planning something big. And using Tiffany's wedding as the stage, I replied, lips pressed together. Let's not keep them waiting. We moved through the crowd, weaving past guests I didn't recognize, each of whom paused long enough to offer generic congratulations on the beautiful ceremony. I accepted their compliments with tight smiles and polite nods, never slowing my pace. As we approached the table, I could make out Richard's voice, confident and controlled. By integrating our portfolio with Powell Construction's logistics, we can streamline project timelines by up to 30%. Scott will lead the transition. Our updated software gives us real-time data access, something our competitors haven't. Caught up to. Scott sat next to him, beaming with eager pride. eating up the praise like a child finally given the approval he'd always craved. Tiffany sat with her hand on his arm, posture immaculate, eyes scanning the room like a queen, surveying her kingdom. Every piece of her world was perfectly placed. Until I stepped into view. Their conversation faltered as I came to a stop beside the table. For a brief moment, no one said a word. Then Richard turned, and his smile wavered. "Vanessa," he said, standing. "We were just discussing business strategy. You might find it relevant." "Oh, I do," I said, calm and measured. "Very relevant. In fact, I heard the part about software integration." "Interesting, considering the platform you're talking about was developed by my company." Scott looked up at me, his face paling. "Van, maybe we can talk about this later." "No," I said simply. "I think now is the perfect time. You're showcasing a product developed by Nexus Technologies, the very system your operations team scouted for months. You're building your next move on something I created, and you couldn't even spare me a seat at your table." A tense silence spread like wildfire. The men at the table shifted in their seats, exchanging looks that danced between curiosity and discomfort. "There was a mix-up," Tiffany said tightly. "The seating arrangement wasn't intentional. Large weddings are chaotic." "Right?" I said, my voice sharp but not raised. "A mistake that just happened to put me and my guest in the kitchen while your business partners got top billing." "Sure, sounds like a coincidence." Richard's brow furrowed. 30 million. What are you referring to?" "The contract," I said, looking him straight in the eye. 3 months ago, Nexus signed a deal with Bradford Enterprises. Your signature is on it. You're currently building this entire expansion plan around a platform you bought from me." His face twisted in disbelief as he turned to Scott. "You never told me your sister was Nexus." Scott looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. "It didn't seem relevant at the time." "Didn't seem relevant," I repeated, stunned by the casual betrayal. "You didn't think it was relevant that the software your future father-in-law is pitching at his daughter's wedding came from your sister? That your family is building its legacy on the back of mine?" "This isn't the time," Tiffany interjected, her voice high and clipped. "You're making a scene." "No," I said, pulling out my phone. "This isn't a scene. This is a correction. And a decision." I brought up the contract file, the Nexus logo glowing brightly at the top. My thumb hovered over the termination clause. "Nexus reserves the right to withdraw service for breach of partnership or moral conflict." "I'd say this qualifies." "You can't be serious," Richard said sharply, suddenly realizing the weight of what was unfolding. "I'm dead serious," I answered. "This contract relied on mutual respect. That's been violated." Tiffany stood abruptly, knocking her chair slightly out of place. "You're ruining our wedding," she hissed, her mask slipping at last. Double quotes. "No, Tiffany," I said. I'm reclaiming my voice. "This wasn't about you. It was never about you. But you made it about power, and I'm here to remind you that I have it too." "Vanessa, please," Scott tried again. "We can fix this." "You had your chance," I said coldly. "You don't get to erase me and then expect me to play nice when you need what I built." The businessmen at the table sat stunned, unsure whether to speak or slink away. Marcus stepped forward, standing beside me without a word, his presence grounding me. I turned away, leaving a void where guilt, shame, or embarrassment should have been. I felt none of those things anymore. I had let them treat me like a shadow for too long. But shadows don't stay silent forever. As I walked back through the tent, something incredible happened. People moved. Not physically but perceptively. They looked. They noticed. Whispers chased my heels like echoes in a cathedral. I wasn't the afterthought anymore. I wasn't the girl who'd been misplaced at a wedding. I was the woman who took her place back. Outside, the night was cool and quiet. Marcus joined me a moment later, his face unreadable. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. I nodded. "I'm not angry. Not even hurt anymore. I just see things clearly now." "You were brilliant in there." "No," I replied with a faint smile. I was honest, and that's something none of them expected. We reached the car, the last notes of jazz fading behind us. As I slipped into the passenger seat, I realized this wasn't the end of a family gathering. This was the beginning of my own narrative, one written on my terms, not theirs. And I was done asking for a seat. From now on, I'd build the damn table myself. The moment the words left my mouth, the air in the room shifted. Every face at the table turned toward me, some with confusion, others with dawning realization. I held my phone loosely in one hand. Not because I planned to use IT, but because I wanted them to see that I could, if I chose to. Silence rippled outward like a shockwave, silencing conversations nearby. I'm the founder and CEO of Nexus Technologies, I repeated, my voice measured, but resonant enough to reach beyond the immediate circle. The very system you've spent the last 5 minutes praising. That's mine, not Richard's, not Scott's, mine. Tiffany blinked, her lips parting slightly as if she had been slapped by the weight of truth. Richard remained frozen, his glass still halfway to his mouth, caught in a strange limbo between indignation and awe. But it was Scott's face that held my attention. His eyes darted between me and the stunned guests around us, the color draining from his cheeks. Van, please, he started, voice uneven. This isn't the place. No, I interrupted, sharp but calm. It wasn't the place when I was escorted into the kitchen while strangers took my seat at the table. It wasn't the place when I was deliberately kept from recognition despite playing a pivotal role in your company's latest expansion. So don't lecture me about timing, Scott. The older gentleman to Richard's left, the one who had laughed loudest during the earlier toast, leaned in. You built the system they're using, he asked, his tone now laced with something new. Respect. I designed it, built the infrastructure. Negotiated the contract myself, I replied. Bradford Enterprises is just one of many clients. But the scale of this implementation. It was meant to be a cornerstone project. A partnership, not a political prop, at your daughter's wedding. Richard seemed to gather himself at last, slowly lowering his glass to the table. Why didn't anyone tell me? I did, I said, letting the words linger. When I met with your procurement director. When the contract was finalized. When I sent the welcome letter, signed under my own name. And yet, somehow, everyone remembered Scott as the golden child who facilitated it all. Scott looked like he wanted the ground to open beneath him. It wasn't personal, he mumbled. It was just easier, I echoed, narrowing my eyes. Of course, it was easier to minimize me, to act like I was someone you were helping rather than someone you were relying on. Just like it was easier to misplace my seat, easier to mention my work only when it benefited you. A tense hush enveloped the table. Marcus stood silently beside me, but his presence felt grounding, like an anchor in the rising storm. He didn't need to speak. He didn't need to validate my presence. His very posture said it all. I belonged here. I'm not looking for applause, I continued, my voice steady now, like steel smoothed over fire. I'm not here to make a scene. But I won't let you erase me. Not in this room. Not ever again. I turned then, preparing to leave, but a voice behind me stopped me in my tracks. Miss Pal Vanessa. It was Harrington, the man from Coastal Development. If Nexus Technologies is your company, then perhaps we should schedule a proper meeting. I had no idea we were in the presence of someone so integral to the platform's success. That got Richard's attention. You'd work directly with her. I'd prefer it, Harrington said bluntly. It's only logical. I like dealing with decision makers. Tiffany bristled. This is a wedding, not a boardroom, she snapped. Can we please focus on the event? Harrington didn't even glance her way. Some people understand the value of seizing opportunity when it presents itself, he replied. I offered a tight smile. My schedule's open next week, I said. Let's set something up. As Harrington nodded, another guest leaned forward. A woman in a tailored black dress, likely another executive. If your firm is accepting new projects, I'd love to speak with you as well. We've been exploring automation solutions for our logistics division. I handed her a card. I'd be happy to consult. The momentum had shifted. What had started as an ambush meant to shame me had transformed into an impromptu pitch session. I hadn't just taken my seat at the table, I'd taken control of it. Tiffany's expression soured, her perfect facade cracking just slightly. Well, she said, with a brittle smile, isn't this festive? Scott stood abruptly. Vanessa, maybe we can talk privately. There's nothing more to say, Scott, I said, turning to face him fully. You had every opportunity to give me credit, to respect me. You didn't just overlook me, you chose to. And now, you can live with that. Richard cleared his throat. I'd like to rectify this, he began, clearly trying to regain his authority. Perhaps a formal partnership. I'm not looking for handouts, I cut in. And certainly not out of guilt. If you want a continued partnership with Nexus, it'll be based on professional terms, not family ties. From the corner of my eye, I saw my mother hovering a few tables away, her expression unreadable. She'd undoubtedly heard the exchange, but for once, she remained silent. Perhaps realizing that this moment wasn't hers to shape. Marcus placed a steady hand on my back. "Shall we get some air?" I nodded, turning from the table. As we walked away, the chatter resumed behind us, more muted now, more thoughtful. The facade of perfection had cracked in, the truth had slipped through. Outside, the air was cooler, the sun sinking low over the manicured gardens. The hush of evening offered a stark contrast to the tension inside the tent. "You were brilliant," Marcus said quietly. "I was just honest," I replied. He smiled. "That's what made it brilliant." We walked along the garden path, winding through hedges and beneath archways draped in white roses. In the distance, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses drifted from the tent, muffled and hollow. "You know," I said after a while, "I used to dream of moments like this. Not for the confrontation but to be seen. Truly seen. Not as a daughter or a sister or a supporting act, but as the main character. And now?" Marcus asked. "Now," I said, stopping beneath an arbor, "I don't need their validation. I don't crave their applause. I know who I am, and more importantly, I know what I've built." He studied me for a moment. "So what's next?" I smiled. "Next, I build more. I push forward. And if they can't keep up, then they'll just have to watch from the sidelines." We stood there in silence for a moment, the weight of the evening still settling around us. Then Marcus offered his hand. "Come on, Vanessa, let's go rewrite the rules." I took it without hesitation. Behind us, the tent glowed with artificial light and scripted smiles. But ahead was the path I'd forged myself, unapologetically, fiercely, and finally, completely in my control. We had barely stepped outside the venue when my phone began to vibrate relentlessly in my purse. The screen flashed with incoming calls one after another, but I didn't need to check to know exactly who was trying to reach me. I let it ring, silencing the noise with a tap and a breath. The chaos I'd ignited was spreading like wildfire, and I wasn't going to pour water on it. The valet, a fresh-faced young man in a neatly pressed uniform, brought my Tesla around. His eyes widened as the sleek car glided to a halt, the glossy black reflecting the golden sunset. "Nice ride," he said, clearly impressed as he handed me the keys. I gave him a smile and a generous tip. "Thanks. Turns out, building your own empire pays better than marrying into someone else's." Marcus laughed, sliding effortlessly into the passenger seat. "That was definitely a little petty," he teased, "but also well-deserved." I shrugged, starting the engine. "Petty or not, I've earned the right to say it." Just as I reached for the gear shift, a figure came sprinting across the parking lot. I caught a glimpse in the rearview mirror. My father, face red and breath uneven, waving his hand as he rushed toward the car. "Vanessa, stop that car. Right now." With a heavy sigh, I rolled the window down halfway but didn't bother killing the engine. My father reached us, panting, sweat glistening at his temples despite the cool evening breeze. "What the hell are you thinking?" he barked, voice rising with each word. "You've completely humiliated us. Richard Bradford is fuming. Scott's wedding is practically ruined. Your mother's in tears." I looked at him steadily, unshaken, because I wouldn't accept being shoved into the shadows. Because I refused to smile through blatant disrespect. "It was a seating mix-up," he snapped. "A simple mistake that any gracious guest would have overlooked. A mistake." My voice was cold steel. "They sat me in the kitchen, Dad. Not in the back row, not at the edge of the tent, the kitchen. Tiffany made sure of that." "So what?" he fired back, throwing his arms up. "It's not your wedding. You don't get to dictate where you sit. You show up, you smile, and you keep your ego in check." Marcus leaned forward, calm but firm. "With all due respect, sir, your daughter isn't just another guest. She's the CEO of the very company your son-in-law's family just inked a multi-million-dollar deal with. She deserved better." My father's gaze shifted to Marcus, narrowing. "And who are you to tell me what my daughter deserves?" "He's with me," I said, voice unwavering. "And he's right. This isn't about ego. It's about respect, something I've been denied by this family over and over again." My father bristled, his jaw clenching. "Respect? You just sabotaged your brother's future. Do you have any idea what you've done? Richard was going to make Scott a partner in their next development project. Your little stunt may have cost him everything. And there it was, the real reason for his outrage. Not about hurt feelings or ruined wedding photos, but about Scott's career. Scott's ascent. Scott's place in the Bradford hierarchy. I'm sorry if my actions hurt Scott's prospects, I said with not an ounce of remorse, but I refuse to let anyone treat me like a placeholder while profiting off the technology I created. Nexus isn't just another vendor. We're leaders in our field. And I won't let them pretend otherwise. You need to fix this, he ordered, voice trembling with urgency. Call them back. Tell them it was all a misunderstanding, that you got emotional. Make it right. No, I said simply. I won't lie to protect egos. The deal is done. I pulled out, and I stand by that decision. Just then, my mother appeared behind him. Her dress was immaculate, but her eyes were rimmed with smudged mascara. The kind that only comes from crying behind closed doors. Vanessa, please, she begged, her voice cracking. Do you know what you're doing to this family? Scott is devastated. I stared at her, my fingers tightening around the steering wheel. What I'm doing? A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Where was this concern when I was building a company from nothing? When I worked 80-hour weeks just to stay afloat while you bragged about Scott's every promotion? That's not fair, she whispered. We've always been proud of you. Really? My tone was razor sharp. Name one time. One single moment where you stood in a room full of people and said, "That's my daughter. She built Nexus Technologies from the ground up. She's a powerhouse." You didn't even know I was the one behind the software Bradford was raving about until I told you. Silence hung between us, heavy and damning. We love you, Vanessa, my father said, but the words felt rehearsed, hollow. We just want what's best for everyone. No, I said. You want what's best for Scott, and maybe Tiffany, now that she's officially part of the club. But me, I've always been the inconvenient daughter. Too independent, too ambitious, too unwilling to play the role you assigned me. We didn't assign you anything. My mother insisted, her voice rising in desperation. We just didn't know how to help you. You didn't try, I replied. You watched me fight for recognition while celebrating every inch Scott gained as if he climbed Everest. And now, when I finally draw a line, you call me selfish. You embarrassed the family in front of powerful people. My father spat. There will be consequences. There already were, I replied coolly. Every time you overlooked me, every time you made excuses for how they treated me today, those were consequences too. I just stopped pretending they didn't matter. My mother wiped her eyes, struggling to compose herself. So that's it? You're just going to walk away? I looked at her, at both of them. I'm not walking away from the family. I'm walking toward the life I built, the respect I've earned, and the self-worth I've fought for. If you want to be a part of that life, you'll have to come find me on my terms. Without another word, I rolled up the window, letting the silence settle like dust behind me. Marcus reached over, his hand finding mine. You okay? He asked softly. I took a deep breath, the engine humming beneath us like a steady heartbeat, for the first time in a long while. Yeah, I am, as I pulled away from the chaos, leaving the chandelier's champagne and accusations in the rearview mirror, I realized something simple and profound. I didn't need their approval. I never had. What I'd always needed was to believe that I was enough. With or without their validation. And I did. Finally, one time, I said quietly, my voice trembling but firm, just one moment. Tell me if you've ever introduced me to someone important with the same pride you show when talking about Scott and his Bradford connection. My mother looked at me, her mouth slightly parted, but no words came. Her silence, heavy and telling, hung between us. That was all the answer I needed. Around us, whispers began to stir, like dry leaves caught in a gust of wind. Guests had gathered, standing at a cautious distance, their champagne flutes forgotten as they watched the unraveling of our family in real time. I spotted cousin Olivia on the edge of the crowd. She gave me the faintest nod, a quiet sign of solidarity, her expression calm, supportive, one of the few moments of understanding I'd received today. I think, I said, directing my words to my parents but projecting them to the onlookers too. We should pause this conversation, pick it back up another time, when things are calmer. There's nothing left to say, my father snapped, his voice clipped and cold. You've made your position quite clear. You chose to humiliate your brother. You turned your back on this family. You stood against Richard Bradford, your new family by marriage. No, I replied, standing taller. I didn't stand against anyone. I stood for myself. There's a difference. Before the conversation could descend further, I heard rushed footsteps approaching from the house. Scott appeared, disheveled and flushed. the perfect groom's image now marred by stress. Behind him came Tiffany, her tightly curled hair slightly loosened, her makeup a bit smudged, followed by Richard Bradford, whose demeanor remained tightly controlled. "Vanessa, what the actual hell?" Scott barked, his voice cracking. "Richard is threatening to withdraw all business from Powell Construction. Do you know what that means for Dad's company? Do you even understand what you've done?" "Didn't intend to hurt you," I answered, keeping my tone calm, though my hands were clenched at my sides. "That wasn't the goal. But it's what happened," he shouted, completely unraveling. "You couldn't just be normal for one damn day. You had to blow up everything over a stupid chair." Marcus took a step forward instinctively, but I held out a hand, gently stopping him. This was my fight. I needed to finish it. "My stupid tech company, as you call it, is currently valued at over $200 million, I said steadily. "It provides jobs for 65 people. Until an hour ago, it was providing key systems to Bradford Enterprises systems your new father-in-law couldn't stop bragging about. I didn't sabotage anything. I made a call to protect my company from a partnership that clearly didn't see me as an equal. Then fix it." Scott nearly screamed. "Call them back. Say you were emotional, overwhelmed, whatever. Undo it. It's not a mistake to stand up for myself," I replied with finality, "and I won't pretend it is just to salvage your opportunity." Tiffany pushed forward then, her voice shrill and shaking. "You just couldn't help yourself, could you? This was supposed to be my wedding. My moment. But you had to steal the spotlight because you couldn't get over your damn ego." "Tiffany, that's enough." Richard's voice boomed over hers. The first time I'd heard him raise it. She turned, startled, as he stepped closer to the car, his expression unreadable. "Miss Powell," he began, more measured now, "I believe there's been a considerable misunderstanding." "There's been no confusion, Mr. Bradford," I replied, my gaze unwavering. "Your daughter made her intentions and her disdain quite clear. I was never meant to be welcomed, just tolerated." Richard looked at Tiffany, whose face flushed in embarrassment. For a brief second, she seemed almost contrite, but it passed. "Nevertheless," he said, choosing his words carefully, "this contract between our companies is of significant importance. Ending it hastily would carry real consequences for both sides." "I understand the weight of the decision," I answered. "But my position is unchanged." His composed mask wavered, just slightly. "You're prepared to walk away from $30 million over a seating decision." "I'm willing to walk away from a partnership that treated me like a second-class guest while profiting from my work," I said. The money was never the primary concern. Respect was. A flicker of something surprise, maybe even admiration, crossed his face. He took a slow breath, adjusting the cuff of his sleeve. "Understood. My legal team will be in touch. I'll have mine ready as well," I assured him. "Despite everything, I'll make sure the transition causes as little disruption to your operations as possible." That brief moment of mutual professionalism seemed to ignite something far more volatile in Tiffany. Her composure, already frayed, snapped entirely. "You can't just let her walk away, Daddy," she shrieked. "She's doing this out of jealousy. She's jealous of me and Scott, jealous of our wedding, our future, our family. You're letting her ruin it all." Richard turned to his daughter, his voice sharp, edged with authority. "Tiffany, enough. Go back inside. Attend to our guests. We'll talk later." "But I said now." Tiffany glared at me like I had personally ripped her wedding veil off and set it on fire. But she turned and stormed back toward the reception tent, her heels digging into the grass, her gown trailing behind like a tattered flag of surrender. My parents followed, their faces pale and tight with unspoken judgment. My mother cast one last desperate glance at me, her expression a plea I no longer had space to entertain. And then they were gone. Richard lingered, stepping closer to my window. His voice dropped, no longer corporate, no longer political, just human. "For what it's worth," he said, low and even, "I didn't know about the seating issue. Had I been informed, I would have addressed it immediately." "I appreciate that," I said softly, "but it doesn't change the truth. I wasn't seen, not until I forced the room to look." He nodded slowly, a flicker of understanding behind his eyes. "I may not agree with your course of action, but I respect the strength it took to follow it." He extended a hand toward me. I took it. "Good day, Miss Powell. Goodbye, Mr. Bradford." As he stepped away, Marcus leaned toward me, his voice low with awe. "You just burned the whole empire down, and you didn't even flinch." I exhaled, letting my shoulders relax for the first time all day. No, I whispered, shifting the car into gear. I didn't burn it down. I just reminded them who built the damn software running it. And with that, I pressed the accelerator and pulled away, leaving behind the tent, the guests, the shadows of people who had only ever seen me when I made them uncomfortable. The road ahead wasn't paved with applause or acceptance. But it was mine, and for the first time in years. That was more than enough. I shook his hand with a quick nod, then shifted into drive. Scott remained frozen in the driveway, his face, a storm of disbelief and simmering rage as we eased out of the estate. The tension that had wrapped itself around my spine all day began to uncoil, slowly melting away with every meter we put between us and the wreckage. Marcus glanced over, brow furrowed. That was intense. You holding up okay? I exhaled a long breath, the first one that didn't feel trapped in my chest. Honestly, I haven't felt this free in years. Like I finally dropped a burden I didn't even know I was carrying. The weight of needing their validation, he said gently. My gaze flicked to the rearview mirror, watching the Bradford estate grow smaller and smaller, like a bad memory fading behind us. Exactly. I spent so long trying to convince them I was enough, that I mattered. Today, for the first time, I realized I don't need their approval to know my worth. So, what now? Marcus asked, breaking the silence as we merged onto the main road. Besides finding a restaurant with decent food and seating that doesn't involve a mop bucket. I laughed an actual laugh, not forced or strained. It was light, even a little surprised. Now we rebuild. Nexus doesn't need Bradford Enterprises to survive. We've built stronger relationships. We've got new avenues to explore. And for the first time, I have something I was always missing. He looked at me. What's that? Self-respect, I answered, the words tasting like strength on my tongue. Turns out, it's worth far more than $30 million. By Monday morning, reality came knocking in the form of a full-blown inbox explosion. The first email arrived at 6:43 a.m. By the time I stepped through the doors of Nexus Technologies at 8 o'clock sharp, my inbox had ballooned with 17 messages from executives at Bradford Enterprises. Some were drenched in apology, others reeked of panic. 3 came from Eleanor Wright alone, each one more urgent than the last. Good morning, Sarah, I greeted my assistant as I passed her desk. Her worried expression said it all before she even spoke. You've seen the emails. I have. I'm assuming the calls have started too. Sarah nodded, already scanning her monitor. Eleanor called twice. Sounded ... frazzled, and Mr. Bradford himself rang 5 minutes ago. Asked when you'd be available to talk. Book a call with Eleanor for 10 o'clock, I instructed, keeping my tone neutral. As for Richard Bradford, let him know I'm in meetings today. Tell him I can speak with him tomorrow afternoon. Sarah blinked. Tomorrow, he said it was urgent. I'm sure he did, I said smoothly, but we need to finalize our transition strategy before I discuss anything further. It's not just business, it's our business. I hadn't even sat down fully at my desk when Gregory Phillips appeared in my doorway, his arms folded in an unreadable look on his face. Well, he started, leaning casually against the doorframe. Want to tell me what exactly happened at your brother's wedding that made you cancel the biggest contract on our books? I motioned for him to come in and shut the door behind him. It's a bit of a tale, but in short, Bradford Enterprises, or more specifically, the people behind it, showed me exactly how little they respect me. Or this company. Gregory raised an eyebrow. And your solution was to sever ties immediately. I nodded. They sat me in the kitchen at a wedding I wasn't even supposed to attend reluctantly. Then had the audacity to treat me like I was an inconvenience, even after everything I've achieved. I decided we're better off doing business with companies that see our worth. He let out a low whistle. Wow, that must have been some reception. You have no idea, I replied, then gave him a condensed version of the events. The deliberate seating. The confrontation. The fallout. Gregory was silent for a beat. I wish I could say I'm shocked, but after hearing bits and pieces about your family over the years, it sadly checks out. The important part now is moving forward, I said, shifting the focus. Bradford made up nearly a quarter of our projected revenue for this fiscal year. We need to make up that gap fast. I've already got a few ideas, Gregory said confidently. Remember that demo we did for Westfield Partners last month? They were on the fence, but if we give them a modest incentive, I think we could seal the deal. That could definitely ease the shortfall. Do it, I said. And let's escalate our global rollout strategy. The European market has been warming up to our model. With the Bradford deployment scrapped, we can reallocate some of our team. Before he could respond, my intercom buzzed. Vanessa. Sarah's voice came through. Thomas Harrington from Coastal Development is on line 1. He says it's regarding a potential contract. Gregory gave me a curious look. Thomas Harrington, as in, the one from the wedding. Exactly him, I replied, equally surprised. Stay, I want your perspective on this. I pressed the speaker button. Mr. Harrington, this is Vanessa Powell. Miss Powell, good morning. I hope I'm not intruding. Not at all. What can I help you with? Well, he said smoothly, after our brief encounter at the wedding, I took some time to look into Nexus Technologies. I was, extremely impressed with what you've built. I think Coastal Development could benefit significantly from your systems. I kept my tone steady. Thank you, Mr. Harrington. I appreciate your interest. We'd be happy to schedule a demonstration at your convenience. Excellent. And there's one more thing I wanted to mention. As you know, we've been in preliminary talks with Bradford Enterprises on a few joint projects. But after witnessing how things played out on Saturday, let's just say I'm reevaluating whether they align with our company's values. Gregory and I exchanged a look. This was unexpected. I see, I said cautiously. You demonstrated integrity, Miss Powell, he continued. It was refreshing, frankly, and it gave me clarity. If you're available, I'd like to discuss a long-term partnership between our firms. I'm available, I replied. Sarah will set up a meeting. After the call ended, Gregory let out a low chuckle. Talk about poetic justice. Sometimes walking away creates the space for something better, I said quietly, more to myself than anyone else. He nodded. You just proved something most CEOs never get to. You can take a stand without sinking the ship. That takes guts. I looked around my office, the place I had poured years of effort into. Every milestone, every setback, every sleepless night had led to this moment. I had chosen myself. My values, my dignity, and the world hadn't ended. In fact, it was beginning to open. Gregory's eyebrows arched as he stared at the phone, clearly impressed. I managed a calm nod, but inside, a swirl of emotions rippled through me: disbelief, relief, and a strange flicker of vindication. I didn't see that coming, Gregory said, his voice low. No one did. I replied, straightening the papers on my desk. But it seems Coastal Development was paying more attention than we realized. He let out a breath. That's a hell of a silver lining. It could be more than that, I said. Their portfolio outpaces Bradford's by a significant margin. If we secure a contract with them, it won't just replace what we lost, it might set us ahead. Gregory gave a slow, thoughtful nod. Then we'd better make sure we're ready. Coastal's not known for second chances. Let's prepare the pitch like it's the most important of the year, I said. Because it just might be. By noon, the entire company knew about the terminated contract. While I'd kept the personal details private, word had spread quickly that something serious had occurred. To their credit, no one pressed for an explanation. Instead, the leadership team rallied, shifting gears with remarkable speed and unity. My scheduled 10 a.m. call with Eleanor Wright had been strained but professional. I'd expected anger, maybe even threats. Instead, I found her sounding more disappointed than furious. It's not just the contract, Vanessa, she said after a long pause. It's everything we built together. My team put months into this integration. I know, I replied quietly. And I deeply regret how this impacts your work. It's not a reflection on you or your team. You've been nothing but exceptional partners. There was a beat of silence before she responded. For what it's worth, I didn't know about the seating debacle until Richard mentioned it this morning. It's appalling. Honestly, I appreciate you saying that. Is there any possibility, any at all, of salvaging this? She asked. Different terms, a phased contract, even a cooling-off period. I hesitated, then said gently but firmly. Some breaches go beyond negotiation, Eleanor. This is one of them. But we'll do everything in our power to ensure a smooth transition to whatever provider you choose next. She exhaled slowly, disappointment heavy in her voice. Understood. I hope someday they realize what they lost. The call ended, leaving me staring at the screen, heart weighed down but resolute. I'd made the right decision, even if it was difficult, at 3:12 p.m. My personal cell buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Normally I'd let it ring through to voicemail, but instinct made me answer. Vanessa Powell speaking. Vanessa, it's Diana. Diana Powell, your father's sister. I froze. Aunt Diana. It's me, she confirmed, her tone warm, tinged with something softer, nostalgia perhaps. I didn't expect to ever hear from you. I imagine not, she said with a light laugh. But I've been keeping tabs, and I heard about what happened at Scott's wedding. Word travels fast, I guess, I murmured, still reeling. In certain circles, it does, she said, but I'm not calling for gossip. I called to tell you, I'm proud of you. Emotion hit me like a wave, proud. For standing your ground. For refusing to be sidelined for the sake of appearances and family politics. It's long overdue in this family. There was a weight behind her words, one I didn't yet understand. I don't know what to say. Then just listen, she said gently. Because there are things you should know, things your father probably never told you. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding. I started working at Powell Construction when I was 16, she began. Every summer, every winter break, every spare moment. I helped build it alongside your grandfather, drafting plans, meeting clients, balancing budgets. By the time I was 30, I'd built a successful interior design firm on my own. But when it came time to choose a successor for the family business, she paused. They gave it to your father, no questions. No conversation, just handed it over, because I was the daughter. And it didn't matter how hard I'd worked, how much I'd contributed. I was silent, the parallels crashing into me like a train. That's why I left, she said. Not because I was angry, though I was, but because I realized nothing I did would ever be enough for them. I had no idea, I whispered. Dad never explained why you were gone. Of course not, she said with a bitter chuckle. It didn't fit the story he wanted to tell. But when I heard what you did, standing up to all of them, refusing to be belittled for daring to succeed on your own terms, it broke something open in me. Something that's been closed for 20 years. I don't even know what to say. Then let's not waste time on regret, she said softly. Let's meet. Have dinner. I want to hear everything, your story, your work, your vision. I'd like that, I said quietly. I'd like that very much. We set a date for the following week. When the call ended, I stared out the window for a long moment, heart swelling with something new and unexpected, connection, belonging. The rest of the afternoon continued to bring surprises. At 4:18, Gerald Winters from Apex Investments called. His voice was brisk but friendly, and he got straight to the point. I've followed Nexus Technologies for a while now, he said. But the way you handled the Bradford fallout, that was leadership. Real leadership. I appreciate that, I replied, cautious but curious. I'm not just calling to commend you, he continued. I'd like to discuss a possible strategic investment, something to support your international expansion. We believe Nexus is positioned to scale rapidly, and we'd like to be part of that growth. My heart skipped. I'm open to a conversation. Let's make it happen. I'll have my team reach out with some dates for a deeper discussion. We ended the call, and I immediately contacted legal to start drafting the final documents for terminating the Bradford contract. At the same time, I flagged 3 new potential partnerships that had emerged in the wake of the wedding, each more promising than the last. It was ironic. The event meant to cement my family's social standing had become the catalyst for my independence and my company's next chapter. As I gathered my things for the day, my phone buzzed again. A text this time, from Scott. Need to talk. Just you and me. Lunch tomorrow. I stared at the message, unmoving. His first contact since the confrontation. Part of me wanted to delete it. Another part hesitated. He was still my brother, even if the rift between us felt unbridgeable. I typed slowly. Luciano's, 1 o'clock. P.M. Just us. The reply came instantly. Thank you. I tucked the phone away. Tomorrow would bring its own set of emotions, its own reckoning. But tonight, for the first time in years, I felt whole. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped trying to prove myself to people who would never see me clearly. Now, I saw myself. And that changed everything. The drive home felt different that evening. The engine purred beneath me, the city passing by in streaks of fading sunlight. But my mind wasn't with the road, it was still tangled in everything that had unraveled and then, somehow, come back together in a way I hadn't expected. I had braced for disaster. I had prepared for the usual consequences of standing up for myself, for rejection, humiliation, maybe the collapse of everything I'd spent years building. Instead, What I found was something I hadn't dared to hope for: validation, support, and not the quiet kind. It came loud, clear, and from people who finally saw me for who I was, not who they thought I should be. Back home, the scent of garlic and olive oil filled the kitchen as I stirred dinner. My thoughts wandered back to Gerald Winters and Thomas Harrington, their calls, their excitement, their eagerness to partner with Nexus. I thought about the way they spoke to me, not with condescension or indifference, but with genuine respect. Respect that had been missing for far too long. Then, my phone rang. "Marcus, I'm almost afraid to ask," he said, his voice light with mischief. "Did Richard Bradford crumble into a pile of dust yet?" I smiled. "Not quite, but I think he's on the verge." "Do tell." So I did. I told him about the call from Gerald, the email from Thomas, the surprise message from Aunt Diana after years of silence, and Scott, my brother, of all people, asking to meet face to face. "It's like the universe flipped a switch," I said, still trying to make sense of it all. I didn't think standing my ground would actually change anything. I just couldn't let them take any more of me. "Maybe that's all it ever takes," Marcus replied, "to stop handing over pieces of yourself to people who only show up when it benefits them. And once you really stop, they can't help but notice what they lost." I leaned against the kitchen counter, staring at the steam rising from the pot. "Do you think this will last?" "It's not about lasting," he said. "It's about shifting. You're not the same woman who sat quietly through the wedding rehearsal. You're not shrinking anymore. And once you change, everything around you has to respond to that." I didn't know how to reply, so I just let the silence stretch. His words clung to me long after we hung up. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe the change wasn't in them, it was in me. Maybe it had always been in me, and I just hadn't allowed myself to see it. After dinner, I curled up on the couch with my laptop. Dozens of emails awaited replies, but one stood out among the rest. Subject: Reproposal for re-engagement discussion. It was from Richard Bradford. I stared at the name for a long time. Eventually, curiosity won out, and I opened the message. It was carefully composed, clearly reviewed by someone in legal or PR. Words like mutually beneficial and constructive collaboration filled the paragraphs. Each sentence dipped in polite professionalism, but beneath the surface, I felt an unspoken urgency. Richard wanted a meeting, a real one, face to face, no intermediaries, no drama, just a clean, formal conversation. I didn't answer, not right away. I flagged the message and closed my laptop because this time, I wasn't going to be rushed. I wasn't going to chase approval, and I wasn't going to forgive just because someone finally noticed the damage they'd caused. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. The days that followed unfolded quietly but not without significance. Our inbox overflowed with new inquiries, investors, collaborators, even former critics who now wanted to be part of what we were building. The narrative was changing. Then came Thursday. Rain tapped against my office windows as I received a call from Eleanor Wright. "Lunch?" she asked simply. "Lucho's 1 o'clock. I hesitated. She sensed it. "It's not a trap," she added with a small laugh. "Just a conversation." I agreed. The rain had intensified by the time I stepped into the familiar restaurant. The space smelled of rosemary and aged wood, and the lighting was soft, almost nostalgic. Eleanor was already seated near the back, a glass of sparkling water in front of her. She stood to greet me. Her expression was warm, but her posture was tense. "Thank you for coming," she said. We exchanged pleasantries. Then came the silency, kind that begged to be filled with truth. "I'll be direct," Eleanor said finally. "The transition to the new system has been rough. We're behind schedule. The software isn't compatible with our existing infrastructure, and the board is, frankly, panicking." I said nothing. She continued. "They know they messed up. Richard especially. He's not saying it publicly, but internally. He's admitting the mistake, and they want to fix it." I tilted my head slightly. "Fix it how?" "They want to start over. Reopen talks. Build something new with you. Without Richard." That caught my attention. Eleanor leaned in. "They're prepared to issue a formal apology. In writing, not a press release, a letter. Addressed to you, acknowledging what happened. The board is willing to put their names on it." I folded my hands. "And what about Tiffany? Scott?" "Tiffany's been asked to step away from any external communications indefinitely. As for Scott," she trailed off, "he's rethinking everything." "I think you already know that though." I did. A few days earlier, I had met Scott. At this same restaurant, he'd looked tired. Not physically, but emotionally. Like someone finally realizing the mirror he'd been staring into his whole life was cracked. I let her change the seating chart, he admitted. She said you'd make me look bad in front of our friends. Said your company's success would outshine mine. And I didn't argue. I just let it happen. I didn't speak. He stared down at the table. I was jealous. I didn't know how to say it. I wanted to be proud of you, but I couldn't get past the fact that you did it all on your own. Without me. Without anyone. You didn't need help. And I resented that. His voice broke slightly. And now I'm ashamed. Because all you ever did was try to include me. That conversation had stayed with me, echoing louder with each day that passed. Back at the table with Eleanor, I studied her. I appreciate your honesty, I said. But I'm not sure I'm interested in going backward. Too much has happened. Too many lines were crossed. Eleanor nodded. Then don't go backward, go forward. Just on your terms this time. I considered that, not because I needed validation, but because I wanted closure. Not the kind wrapped in apologies, but the kind that came from making my own decisions, without fear or guilt. We finished our lunch. She offered a soft smile before partying. Whatever you decide, just know we finally see you clearly. That evening, I sat at my desk, staring at Richard's email once again. I opened a blank reply and typed, "Thank you for your message. I'm open to a conversation, but it must be under new terms, with different leadership present. Future dialogue will be governed by transparency and mutual respect." I read it over once, then hit send. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel bitter. I just felt clear. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't reconciliation. This was balance. I wasn't seeking approval. I wasn't chasing apologies. I was walking forward, and anyone who wanted to walk with me needed to catch up. The past no longer had a grip on me. And for the first time, the future didn't terrify me, because I had finally learned that power doesn't come from how loudly you speak, it comes from knowing when you don't need to say anything at all. I arrived at Luciano's 10 minutes early. The air crisp with the scent of roasted garlic and grilled seafood wafting from the kitchen. The dining room was quiet, the lunch crowd still filtering in. A hostess led me to a secluded table near the back, a booth half shielded by a frosted glass divider. I slid into the seat and ordered a glass of sparkling water, my mind racing, my nerves taut. The moment had weight, not because I was unsure of myself, but because, despite everything, part of me still cared about what Scott had to say. He walked in exactly at 1 p.m., spotless in a navy blazer and an open-collared white shirt. He looked like the golden boy again. No signs remained of the emotional collapse from the wedding day, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. As he spotted me and approached, I could tell he was walking into this conversation with caution, not confidence. "Vanessa," he greeted as he sat down across from me. His voice lacked its usual bravado. "Thanks for agreeing to meet." I nodded but said nothing, waiting for him to begin. A waiter came by, dropped menus, and promised to return shortly. Once we were alone, again, Scott leaned forward, his eyes scanning my face for a trace of warmth. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," he began, "and I'm not going to pretend I handled anything well. I didn't." "No, you didn't," I said quietly but firmly. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "The wedding, it spiraled. Faster than I expected. I knew you weren't happy, but I didn't realize how far things had gone until Richard called me the next morning and told me about the contract being pulled." "It didn't spiral, Scott," I replied. "It snapped. It snapped under years of being dismissed and belittled. The wedding was just the final straw." He blinked, caught off guard by my calm delivery. I know. I just, I guess I didn't realize how much you'd been holding in. That's the problem, isn't it?" I said, folding my hands in front of me. "You didn't realize, because it never occurred to you that I might have a threshold. That I might eventually reach a point where staying quiet was more painful than speaking up." He didn't have a response to that. Instead, he picked up the menu, stared at it blankly, then set it down again. "You know, growing up, you were always the one who had her stuff together. You were the planner. The one with the internships, the early graduation, the business pitch ready before you could legally drink. I figured you didn't need anyone's help. That you were already on your path, and you thought that absolved you of showing me basic respect." "No," he said quickly, "but maybe I thought you didn't care if you had it or not. You always seemed above it. I shook my head. What you call being above it was me pretending. Pretending that I didn't see the way Dad praised your C+ business courses while ignoring my first round of funding. Pretending that it didn't sting when Mom told her friends about your projects but never once mentioned Nexus unless I brought it up. Scott leaned back, visibly unsettled. I never realized. That's the problem, Scott. No one in our family did. And when I stopped pretending, when I finally pushed back, it shook the illusion you all had of who I was supposed to be. That's why it escalated so fast. He looked genuinely remorseful now. The self-assured groom I saw just days ago was gone, replaced by someone who seemed uncertain where he stood in my life. You didn't deserve what happened, he said softly. Not the table. Not the comments. And definitely not the way Dad acted or you, I added pointedly. You stood by and watched it happen, said nothing. He nodded, his jaw tightening. You're right. I failed you. The waiter returned then, and we both ordered, though the menus hadn't truly been opened. Once he was gone again, the silence between us stretched. Not heavy, not yet healing, just raw. I want to fix this, Scott said finally. Not just the business fallout, though God knows that's been a mess, but us. I don't want to lose my sister. You don't have to lose me, I said carefully, but things won't go back to the way they were. I've changed. I've grown. And I won't shrink myself again to fit into anyone's version of what I should be. I wouldn't ask you to, he replied quickly. I mean, I admire what you did. Walking away from the Bradford deal, it was gutsy. It wasn't gutsy, I corrected. It was necessary. Because if I can't uphold my own dignity in business, what's the point of building anything? He considered that in silence. You know, he said after a moment, Tiffany's furious. She thinks you deliberately sabotaged the wedding to upstage her. I rolled my eyes. Of course she does. Because in her world, everything is about her. Yeah, Scott said with a dry laugh. That's becoming clearer. I looked at him sharply. You're having second thoughts. I don't know, he admitted. I'm still trying to sort out what was genuine and what was performative, but the last few days have forced me to ask a lot of questions I wasn't ready for. That's not a bad thing, I said gently. Growth rarely is. We fell into a more comfortable silence, both sipping water, both processing. Then he looked up at me with something I hadn't seen in a long time: vulnerability. Dad hasn't spoken to me since Sunday. I'm not surprised, I said. He's used to controlling everything. The moment someone pushes back, he shuts them out. He said I embarrassed the family. You didn't, I assured him. But maybe the family needed to be embarrassed. Maybe it was the only way to see the cracks that were always there. He let out a slow breath, nodding. You think it's possible to rebuild from that? I do, but only if we stop pretending the cracks don't exist. Our food arrived then, and the conversation shifted briefly to work, to Nexus, to where Scott's firm stood now that the Bradfords were in limbo. It was oddly normal, two professionals discussing logistics, projections, and restructuring time. But beneath it all was the current of something new. Mutual respect. As lunch wound down, Scott reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. I was going to wait, but maybe now's the right time, he said, sliding it across the table. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a check, a sizable one. My eyes widened. This is an investment, he said quickly. Not a handout. I want in on your international expansion. Silent partner, no control, no interference, just support. I stared at him, stunned. Why? Because you've built something real, he said, his voice firm. And because for the first time in my life, I see you. Not as my little sister, not as the family overachiever, but as a powerhouse. And I want to be part of what comes next. On your terms. Emotion welled up in my throat, unexpected and fierce. I nodded slowly, touched by his gesture, but more by what it symbolized. I'll think about it, I said carefully. But thank you. That means more than you know. He smiled. A real one this time. No arrogance. No arrogance, no FAQ. As we stepped out onto the sidewalk, the sun high above and the city buzzing around us, he turned to me. I meant what I said in the restaurant. I don't want to lose you. You won't, I replied. But from now on, I decide what role I play in this family. No more shrinking. No more silence. He held out his hand, and this time, I took it. Not as a peace offering, but as a sign of new terms. A fresh start, built on truth, on choice, and finally on respect. The greatest transformation, I realized, didn't come from contracts signed or accolades earned. It came from reclaiming power in the spaces where I had once felt invisible. That's why I started a mentorship initiative for women navigating the harsh terrain of tech, especially those battling expectations at home or limitations imposed by society. I named it Visible, a quiet rebellion against all the years we were told to shrink ourselves to fit someone else's mold. Visible wasn't just about growing companies or refining pitches. It was about rebuilding identity. It offered guidance not only in strategy and leadership, but in something far more vital: how to protect your dignity in rooms designed to test it. We discussed boundary setting, emotional labor, confidence, and the quiet resilience it takes to stay soft in a world that rewards sharp edges. Our first group, 20 women, met every week. Some were new founders. Others had built small empires but were still fighting to be heard. Their stories were eerily familiar. Bosses who took credit for their work. Families that encouraged their dreams. But only to a point. Spouses who celebrated them until their light got too bright in helping them chart their paths. I found myself revisiting my own. I thought I was the guide, but healing found me, too. Each breakthrough they had reminded me of my own. Each boundary they claimed lit up the ones I still needed to honor. One evening, as twilight spilled across the balcony and the city glowed beneath us, I turned to Marcus. "You know what still shocks me?" I asked, voice soft. "How everything started shifting from just one decision. One moment I refused to let someone else define my worth and it changed everything." He smiled, brushing his thumb across my hand. "That's how change usually begins. Not with an explosion, but with someone quietly refusing to stay small. One act of courage can break generations of silence." He was right. That wedding had done more than rupture a contract. It had cracked open generational patterns I hadn't even realized I was repeating until I refused to anymore. For years, I had adjusted my volume, my ambition, even my presence to keep others comfortable. But that day, something snapped. And in that fracture, something powerful took root. Just as we were debating takeout, my phone buzzed. A message from Scott lit up the screen. "Dad wants to have dinner next week. Just family. Says he has something important to say, will you come?" I stared at the words. They didn't trigger the guilt they once would have. I didn't feel cornered or obligated. I felt free. I handed the phone to Marcus, letting the weight of the message settle between us. He read it, then looked at me. "It's your call. But whatever you decide, remember this time, you're not walking in as someone seeking approval. You're walking in as the woman who knows her worth." I nodded slowly, then typed my reply. "I'll come, but I'm bringing Marcus. He's important to me, and I want him there." The response came quickly. "Of course. Mom and Dad will be glad too. Get to know him." Maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. But I wasn't stepping into that dinner for their comfort. I was doing it for mine. Not everything was resolved. The contract with Bradford remained a symbol of where lines had to be drawn. My father and I were still separated by more than miles. Years of silence and unspoken disappointment lingered. Scott and Tiffany were adjusting to their new reality, the cracks in their marriage now impossible to ignore. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't reacting to any of it. I was choosing how to engage with boundaries, with clarity, and without apology. The truth is, the story was never really about a seating chart or a lost partnership. It was about something far more personal. It was about no longer accepting less than what I deserved simply because that's how it had always been. It was about recognizing that my place wasn't something others could assign me. It was mine to claim, so I claimed it. Now, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to challenge a family narrative that tried to shrink you? Have you ever walked away from a situation not because you didn't care but because staying meant sacrificing yourself? If you have, I see you, and I want to hear your story. Share it in the comments. You never know who needs to hear. They're not alone. And if you're still on the edge wondering if you're strong enough to step away from what doesn't serve you, this is your sign. Some of the hardest boundaries we ever draw are with the people closest to us, but those are the boundaries that free us the most. If this story spoke to something inside you, like this video. Subscribe for more stories about reclaiming your voice and building your life on your terms. And please send this to someone who needs the reminder that they are worthy, exactly as they are. Thank you for listening, and remember, you don't need anyone's permission to take up space. You've always had the right to stand. And if no one offers you a seat at the table, you can build your own and make it stronger than anything they ever tried to exclude you from.